We're ready, but I think, yeah, we only have a half an hour, so I propose we kick it off. So again, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Thank you very much for joining us today. As stated, with more than 200 people joining us today, we either did a very good job in marketing or this topic is really interesting. So we would like to believe that it's both. Before we dive in, we would love just to give you a brief introduction about what our focus is, who we are, and what challenges we focus in today's regulatory landscape. So who is DocShifter? Well, today we're most known for our rendering functionality. Our software can connect to all your document repositories and can transform documents from one format into another format. Most often that is PDF, but we can do much more. Not only do we transform those documents, we enrich them as well. We can add table of contents, watermark, bookmarks, you name it. But today, and just to make it clear, we're not here to talk about that at all. Today, we'd like to share how Word documents and PDF documents can automatically be checked and fixed to make your life easier. The objective of today is really to cover this at a high level, focusing on functionality really. Of course, we are keen to follow up with you personally afterwards. We are proud to serve many customers today all across the world, from the US over to Europe, to Australia, and even to Japan, large and small companies alike. So very thankful for that. Few practical questions, a few practical things. If you have questions, please raise them in the Q&A section of Zoom. There's a button, if I'm right, somewhere at the bottom of your screen. We will likely not have the time to cover these today, but we will definitely make sure we follow up with you personally and get back to you on these. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Paul, who will be your host for today and presenter. So enjoy it. Paul, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Gert. Hello, everybody, and welcome from London, now outside of the EU, but welcome anyway from here. Obviously, before maybe I go through the automation, I just want to maybe talk through a typical process in when dealing with content, whether that's from Word, whether it's PDF, just really talking through a standard typical document lifecycle. And then I'll get into how we can help automate the QC or the validation part of the process, whether you're talking about Word validation and QCing or whether you're talking about PDF. So I kind of just start off to begin with just talking through a typical current document lifecycle. You know, all the way from obviously sort of creation of the content by the authors, whether those are medical writers, other experts, or internal authors. Kind of looking, obviously going through a whole life cycle of reviewing and updating that content, where there's obviously a lot of checks and fixes, etc., made within Word. And that's one of the areas we'll touch on how we can automate. At various points in time, obviously, of the life cycle, the content is actually rendered into PDF, often handed to other groups, including RegOps or other departments, where they then deal with preparing that PDF for inclusion inside dossiers, so making sure that it's compliant on meeting the technical requirements of the different health authorities where that content will be used. So obviously it goes through preparing for PDF inclusion in a dossier, and often before it can actually be validated to PDF, it often goes through a draft publishing, and at that point a lot of full validation is performed on all of the PDF elements. Can be performed earlier, but sometimes it's not done until the very end. So that's just a typical life cycle. Obviously there's a lot of millions of little in-between steps along the way, but just at a high level, that's who's involved and at what points. So really we're going to focus on how we can speed up the validation and the QC parts of those processes. So obviously where you're talking about medical writers or the authors themselves, those people focused on dealing with the Word content, really the idea is to try to keep them focused on the actual content itself. There's a lot of issues they have to identify, fix, manipulate in some way, shape or form, using various tools, ad hoc tools or plugins, or just Word functionality itself to actually identify issues with the content, the formatting, etc. as well. So obviously, but the idea really for them is to try to leave them focused on the content and hopefully further down the line, automating some of the checks they perform today manually can obviously help enable them to just focus on the core sort of process of the actual dealing with the content. Some of the things that they look for, obviously in Word, are just kind of coming up with some examples. So again, this isn't covering everything that they do, obviously, and all the checks we can perform, but obviously just at some high levels. Obviously, the things like, section numbering sort of coming out of sequence, trying to identify where that's occurring and making sure that's resolved so you don't have out of sequence numbering. Identifying web links or other external links to external documents and making sure they don't carry through to renditions where they potentially would be invalid. Sort of misleading text where you have text that's actually blue, but it isn't actually a hyperlink, identifying those elements as well. Maybe that's part of your process to do that, identify them and then turn them into a hyperlink later. But obviously sort of identifying maybe the misuse of coloring obviously can be useful as well and quite tricky to find. There can be simple things like padding spaces in headings and so on as well, where you have additional spacing adding, but when they're converted to bookmarks, you have unnecessary elements included in there. It just creates sort of an untidy PDF or a lower quality PDF. Images not in line with text, for example, as well. Sort of, again, identifying them, seeing them visually is quite tricky. Sometimes you have to go in to the settings to actually realize that that's not actually the case. Things with issues with tables, for example, making sure they're not, they actually fit the width of the page. They can be kind of condensed somewhat, which can lead to smaller font sizes being used that actually go below the recommended guidelines for font sizes, become illegible, etc. as well. So those are just some issues that obviously you can face in identifying. They obviously, in terms of fixing them in Word, it's often using just Word's own functionality or macros you may have developed internally or with external kind of developers for you to help you resolve some of those issues as well, or various toolbars. When obviously you come through to PDF, obviously it's slightly different there. They're looking at it's converted, the content should mostly be in place. It's really making sure that that content is then ready, whether it's formatting and whether the PDF elements are correct, whether that's bookmarking, linking, tables of contents that are applied and watermarks, etc. Is everything correct in the PDF file as well? And obviously typically that's somebody else further down the chain dealing with those aspects. But again, those things can be very time consuming, extremely manual as well. They often involve checklists if somebody's gone through document by document to check. So often they use different tools, etc. along the way. But identifying things like bookmark issues, making sure you have the correct number of levels of bookmarks depending on where that content will be used, that it's open to the correct level of bookmarks. Issues with hyperlinks, making sure they're the correct color. Sometimes it can seem quite straightforward when they're red, it's easy to see, but you may have black text that's actually a hyperlink that's obviously a lot more difficult visually to see as well. And there are obviously various tools you can use to help identify these things, but they're not fully automatic. They're typically semi-automatic or batch. Things like tables of contents, are they present where they should be? Do you have blue text still, as you had in Word? Do you have blue text that isn't actually a hyperlink? Identifying where that occurs. Making sure the hyperlinks are set correctly, the zoom levels correct according to the guidelines, etc. as well. Same things in the PDF properties, do you have attributes set correctly? Are you using the right PDF version for the health authorities that you're going to be sharing that content with? File sizes don't exceed kind of recommended limits, and it's optimized in the right way for fast web view as well. Making sure fonts are embedded appropriately and correctly, and are your initial view settings correct? Are you seeing it sort of the correct way by default size rather than single or double view size as well? So there's various settings that can be incorrect, and to check all of those values can be very time consuming when you're talking about doing them document by document, or even in any kind of batch mode. It still can be very extremely time consuming. In the case of PDF, obviously the way in which you're modifying them is using Acrobat technology, for example, functionality within Adobe tools, things like pre-flight, for example, as well. Modifying links one by one is extremely time consuming, or bookmarks, making sure settings are correct to, for example, set to inherit zoom. Doing that manually, link by link or bookmark by bookmark, is extremely time consuming. And again, prone to errors and making sure that you cover all of them. So again, these things can be done, obviously manually or semi-manually in some form of batch mode as well. But again, very time consuming. So again, pre-flight can be used as well. So really what we're looking at, just sort of as we lead into sort of this manual method, and obviously a lot of people think of batch in a very similar way to automated and think batch, well, we've got it automated. It's actually batch, and it's not exactly the same as an automated platform as well. And obviously, rather than just looking at text all the time, just, and I'm glad I'm on a webinar here, so you can't see the redness in my face for these, but however, obviously sort of manual batch does include some risk still. There's still some elements, there's some element of human interaction involved, where you lose some control over the process. The consistency isn't necessarily exactly the same because you're not guaranteed that they're going to follow the correct process because there's a manual element involved still. Obviously, that the moment there's manual, there's always a risk included in there as well. Including those things when they're in manual or batch mode into an automated lifecycle flow or workflow is obviously pretty much impossible to do. If there's a manual step, typically that's quite hard to include in an automated workflow, at least. Ultimately, what it leads to is obviously an increased amount of time for quality control and validation. This isn't to say automation, the batch and manual will never be required. There'll always be an element of manual checking required for some types of issues. However, if you can kind of reduce the amount of manual or batch checks that you perform and automate them, obviously it can significantly reduce the amount of time it takes and significantly reduce the risk involved in that as well. So what we're looking at doing is how you could leverage rendering technology, for example, to help automate some of those processes as well, whether you're talking about validating or checking your Word content or your PDF content as well. So as Kurt kind of mentioned a little bit at the beginning, rendering we don't see as just being, a lot of people consider it to be just how to convert into a PDF format, taking a document from one format, making a PDF version of it. And that's obviously a core component to it, but obviously it can incorporate very many other elements in it as well, or it should do, automatically along the way. So you have a flow that not only performs the conversion, but it may incorporate elements like OCRing the text. So you have searchable a PDF at the end automatically as part of that process, not a separate process, but all fully integrated into your rendering flow. Headers and footers potentially applied depending on the use case. Watermarks applied at different lifecycle states. So you have watermarks applied when it's in draft in various other states as well. Bookmarks obviously can be a core problem, especially in some regions. It's not exactly the same region by region. So obviously one rendition doesn't necessarily meet the needs of every single health authority. Even if that document, the same source document is used in different regions, doesn't mean the PDF bookmarks are going to be exactly the same. So how do you kind of deal with that? And it should be possible with the rendering technology as well. Tables of contents can be applied to the rendition as well. Even if the source document doesn't have it, you could always have the rendition tool automatically generate the table of content when it's appropriate. And security typically removed rather than added, but depending on the lifecycle setting, if you're sharing that content with different CRO partners or different external vendors that you're working with, you can also apply security automatically as part of that rendering process before you share it. It's not only used for health authority use, you can use it for different purposes, not only for PDF generation, for other output formats, for inclusion in AI processes or data extraction elements as well, form generation, preparing content to store in an archive as well. So it's not just rendering to PDF, converting to PDF. There are many other elements that you can incorporate as well. It also doesn't just mean one in, one out. It doesn't mean one input file, one word in. It means you get one consistent, one rendition file exactly the same every time. It should be possible for you to have one document come in and automatically recognize where that document needs to be used and create potentially multiple renditions to meet the needs of different health authorities as well. So it can be one in, multiple files out as well. But what we're really focused on here is really taking that flow and adding an element of validation into that process, either at the beginning, no matter what the source repository may be. Again, the rendering platform should really be able to deal with different repository types. No matter how much you harmonize on one standard repository, there'll always be content outside. As much as everybody wants to move off of SharePoint, or most companies do, there's often an element of, we still use it for collaboration or something. So, and SharePoint, there may be folders, shared folders that you want to leverage and have content in. Really being able to kind of have a consistent platform that connects to all of those repositories being possible, regardless of the content, being able to take it through these flows. and then add in this element of validating before you even convert at all, or you may not even want to convert. You're just leveraging that technology to validate, either as part of a rendering flow or completely separate. It's just a validation flow as well on either the source or the final PDF. So if we take, for example, word checks, how you could automate those, and some of the things that you can do with this as well now, is really if you just look at just a simple flow of just validating the content and nothing more, not rendering, just purely a validation component. Really one being able to do that from any repository. In this case, it's a very simple workflow that's just taking content from a SharePoint repository, validating the Word content in this case, and then storing, in this case, just storing a report out that tells me any issues that it's found with the document itself. So it can be fully automated. There's no human interaction involved. Just the moment the document is either created at the right lifecycle state in your document management kind of workflows or life cycles, or the moment it's stored in the correct folder or repository, if you're talking SharePoint or a file share, it can automatically engage and actually perform those checks automatically. No interaction involved at all. Just somebody defines when exactly that check should occur. So you should be able to be performed from any of your repositories and then integrate with your existing document lifecycle. So leveraging what you already have in a consistent way with your DMSs or multiple DMSs, and then checking for issues like hyperlink issues in Word, heading issues, paragraph issues, table issues, for example, as well. I'm not going to go through all the things that you can perform, just highlighting a few, checking things like heading numbering, headings out of sequence, checking for white spaces in the headings, some of the things that I highlighted before in the Word sort of section previously. Things around tables and web links, etc. And really then generating a report that basically shows you a summary of issues. So this engages automatically. A report is generated, and then a summary provided saying this has failed validation, how many issues it found in the summary at the beginning, and then ultimately a detailed report showing you all of the issues that it's found within the document and where those issues occurred. So obviously from a reporting perspective, you can just do that and then share that report with the authoring community for them to make the updates. Perhaps more valuably and more sort of importantly, you're also able then to fix sort of many of the issues as well. There are some, obviously automation isn't suitable for everything, where there needs to be an element of human interaction, a selection made by an individual, by the author or by whoever, that cannot be fully automated, obviously. But anything where it can be automated, it can obviously save a lot of time. And some of these things, can be done like removing heading white spaces, removing the web links, setting images in line and fixing table issues, etc. All of these things not only can we check for, we should be able to automatically fix as well in one of these automated flows. And in this case, just showing you a simple example of a Word document that has some of those simple issues. I'm just choosing some simple ones, and obviously we can always talk to you more later in depth about all the types of checks we can perform. But ultimately in here, I'm just showing some headings that have some white spaces, and I've just kind of selected the white spaces so you can see them in the document. You have numbering that's out of sequence. You have empty paragraphs in the document. You have tables not set to the page width, for example. So some simple issues, and obviously there's more checks that you can perform than that. This is just highlighting the kind of process. So again, fully automatically, if this document was checked in or saved at a certain lifecycle state, we could automatically perform the updates to resolve those issues. No human interaction involved at all. It's gone through, checked the issues. It's removed the heading white spaces. So I've just turned paragraph view on, so you can see there's no spaces here after the headings. It's removed the empty paragraphs. It's corrected the heading numbering. It's set the table to fit the page width, for example, as well. Let's then check this document back into my repository. Again, fully automatically. So just taking that as a simple case, looking then as obviously further down the line with the PDF content, really the kind of checks you want to perform really from a PDF perspective. And really what we're trying to do here is move that validation, those checks earlier in the process, rather than waiting until you've either manipulated it, the PDF files that you generate with other tools, Toolbox and other platforms like that, or waiting until after you've done a draft submission or draft publish to get your final PDFs, really allowing you to begin some of those validation checks earlier in the process. Because once you've rendered and you fix things, you should really in the rendering tool have a much closer final PDF rendition than you might have had previously as well. So really begin the validation earlier if you can, again, without having to go through these other steps. So that's our aim. And what we can do there is, again, have flows. This is a simple flow, again, that's just purely performing the validation. It's not taking any rendition. It's not rendering the document first and then validating it. It's taking PDFs you may have received from your CRO partners or other kind of authoring communities, taking the PDFs and then validating that they've been created in the correct way, ready for sharing with health authority. Even before they put them in a submission, you can make sure that those issues are resolved. There's less for you to do downstream at those publishing stages when you're trying to get the submission out the door. So really, again, you should be able to do this from any repository, no matter where that content resides. Again, integrate with your lifecycle state, so leverage your CMS technology again to engage this fully automatically. And then check issues with bookmarks, hyperlinks, initial view settings, and technical elements of the PDF. And I just highlighted a few in here again, making sure, for example, that you don't have more than 5 levels of bookmarks. The magnification is set correctly on the bookmarks to inherit zoom. All fonts that have been used in the document have been embedded correctly. Internal hyperlinks are all blue. You don't have any miscolored hyperlinks, for example. You've got relative paths on hyperlinks and no external links to websites, for example. It's the right PDF version. Everything is either letter or A4 page, and you can decide and say everything should be letter, just check for letter or just check for A4. If it's a US or a European submission, you can decide and you can configure those. So really sort of a lot of checks that you can define. So what we do, obviously in this case, is then generate a report that says, okay, what issues do I have? It's failed validation. It's found 5 specific issues. And then it gives a detailed result telling you that, there's issues with bookmarks. You've got the initial view. There's no table of content at the beginning of the PDF. So we've told it that there should be a TOC if the document exceeds 5 pages, but it hasn't found one, at least not within the first 3 pages. Fast web view hasn't been enabled. It's not the correct version that we're expecting of PDF. Fonts haven't been embedded that are being used in the documents, and it tells you where exactly they occur for the first time. And there's external links to websites. You have some hyperlinks that weren't actually blue correctly. And then you also have text that's blue. It identifies all text that's blue that isn't actually set as a hyperlink yet. So it's just purely blue text. So again, typically those should be likely to be converted later on. So it can help you identify maybe your publishing group where they need to go and actually add the hyperlinks using your publishing and hyperlinking tools as well. So again, it can help you with that process. But again, these are generated then fully automatically for you. Combining the two, though, you can actually end up with an end-to-end process, validation process. You could take from the beginning, from the source document, you could add some automation or some logic to a workflow and say, depending on the type of file, in this case, it's simply saying, depending on the type of file, if it's a Word file, take one route through the workflow. If it's PDF, take a different route, and everything else, take another route completely. So if it's Word, in this case, it's going to check the document for issues. It's going to create a fixed version of the document that it will store back in your repository. It's going to render the fixed version. It's going to then validate my PDF that it generated, the rendition, and generate a QC report that's then stored back in the repository as well. So all in one go, fully automatically from a Word document, potentially even a draft version still, you have a fixed version of the document, a PDF rendition created, and a QC report generated all automatically in one go. If it was PDF, it would just do a QC report on the PDF file automatically, and then store that QC report for you. And if it's anything else, it will create, using the rendering technology, a fully compliant rendition. And again, fully compliant rendition doesn't mean a rendition you have to go and manipulate further using Toolbox, etc. It should be a rendition that meets the health authority requirements for where that content will be used. In this case, what it also means, I mentioned, it doesn't mean just one in, one out. It doesn't mean as well that everywhere has to be checked the same way. Different regions have different requirements, whether it's related to the bookmarks or some of the specific configurations. You could simply say as well that depending on where this content is planned to be used, we can leverage the attributes you have in your DMS and say, if this document is set to European region, it will actually check against the European PDF specs, and it will actually, you could have a configuration that checks with specific options for Europe. If it's for US, it will be maybe slightly different. If it's for Japan, slightly different again. So you can automatically check against the correct specifications. It could be slightly different, mostly the same, but a little bit different depending on where you intend to use that rendition itself. Okay. So obviously the idea here is that in terms of the benefits, the idea really is to try to reduce your risk. You know, accelerating your QC, accelerating the process for performing those checks. You're never going to get rid of all manual checks or some of the batch things you perform where human interaction is needed or a selection. Ultimately, there'll still be that. But if you can reduce that by a significant percentage, you can significantly accelerate your QC process, provide a lot more control over the validation process itself, and some traceability of when those checks have been performed within your process, and identify those issues earlier on so that you can sort of save time during your publishing and kind of have a little bit less panic at the end of the process. So kind of summary of some of the benefits you get by fully automating the process in there as well. So I hope that was useful. I'll hand over to Gert as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and also thank you for ending it right on time and within the allocated time slot. Before we let you go, we'd actually like to ask you for a short favor. We would love to get a feeling for how we did during the webinar. So can you please take 15 seconds and respond to the poll? We'd like to see how useful this webinar format was for you. Thank you all for joining. We will definitely make sure we follow up on your questions. We've received a few, some were answered, but most were not. So we'll definitely make sure we follow up on those. Also, our contact details will be on the last slide, but I'm sure you know how and where to find us. Again, take care in these still, unfortunately, COVID-19 times, but we are thankful to all pharmaceutical companies, all CROs, everybody that is contributing to making sure that our life can return to normal as soon as possible. Thank you all for joining. Maybe see you at the next webinar. Have a fantastic rest of the morning, afternoon, day, whatever it may be for you. Again, thanks for joining on behalf of the DocShifter team. Bye, everyone. Take care.